Hello and welcome to another episode of Meanbrews. Today we're covering traditional Bock or Dunkels Bock. Let's get right into the data. I was able to find 33 winning Dunkels Bock recipes dating all the way back to the 1980s. 4 were best of show, 13 gold, 11 silver, and 5 bronze. The BJCP style is 6C, a dark, strong, malty German lager beer that emphasizes the malty, rich, and somewhat toasty qualities of continental malts without being sweet in the finish. When I looked at the evolution and the variation between recipes, it was pretty moderate. Some good evolution of the style in some notable areas, and some variability between the recipes. Original gravity, the BJCP range is pretty tight, 1.064 to 1.072, and these ranged anywhere. These were the older recipes, 1.049 up to 1.080. The average was 1.069, and I will be on the high side of that, outside of the BJCP range, because we're seeing that change. Like I said, the earlier recipes back to the 1980s and 90s, just increasing with time up to almost double Bock strength. Final gravity anywhere between 1.012 and 1.026 with an average of 1.018, and I'll be at 1.021 based upon the malts and yeasts that I've used. IBUs anywhere from 18 to 42, big range there. On the high side of BJCP, the average was just at the limit, just at 27. And that's where I'll be, right at 27. Color, squarely within the BJCP range. Nobody went outside of it. The range is 14 to 22. Average was right in the middle, 18 SRM. And that's where I plan to be, right there at 18. The malt percentages, average was 91.2% of base malts. Next was Crystal at 5.6, Toast at 2, and Roast at 1.2. However, this is where we're seeing some evolution. Busy chart, but let's walk through it. Crystal walking down from about 8% to 3, Toast from nothing to the same, about 3%, and then roasted malts from about 2.5 down to about 0.5%, if you follow these trends. Malt types used, again, 100% used a base malt, anywhere between about 82 to 100% of the grist. 93 was the mean, and that's where I'll be with my recipe. The other malts, crystal malts is the black curve, anywhere between 1 and 15% of the grist was crystal malt. Next was roasted malts between, again, 1 and 7%. That's a huge amount of roast malts. And then toasted malts, again, 1 to 15% of the grist. I'll be using very light on the crystal because we saw that curve go down. And I will be using a toasted malt because we're seeing that go up. And for my roast, again, that curve was going down. So just enough to get me the color that I need of roasted malts. Base malts, most prominent was Munich. 97% of the recipes used Munich malt at an average of 51% of the grist. Pilsner or Pale, I kind of grouped them together. They're, I don't think you're going to be able to taste the difference between the two in this style. 76% of the recipes used a Pilsner or Pale, basically to convert the Munich at an average of 47% of the grist. I will be using 75% here. Munich, this is of my base malt, and right around 20% of Pilsner malt, and this is why. Over the years, we had low amounts of Munichs going up to almost all Munich, and Pilsner being the main malt down to practically some of these recipes have no Pilsner malt in them. So big switch in how the flavors are being developed from these styles. I think crystals are coming out. Toasted malts coming in a little bit, but definitely that toasted bready character is coming from the Munich malts that are being added in a huge proportion of the grist in this style. Speaking of crystal malts, I kind of lumped them together because I saw really the differentiator wasn't a medium crystal. It was either a Care Munich or something up to a dark crystal. and then they had a special B or a Cara Aroma, which is a 150 Lava Bond crystal malt. Most prominent here was this medium to dark crystal. 55% of the recipes use that at an average of 7.3% of the grist. And remember, we saw that curve coming down on the crystal malts. So I'm going to be at that 3% that the data says we are today. That makes award-winning recipes. Other ones used, again, I spoke about the Cara Aroma and Special B, and then a sort of lighter crystal between 40 and 60, or Cara Stan. Very light crystal between crystal 10 and 30. Not a lot of recipes use these. Less than a quarter of the recipes use these. Even Cara Pills down here. For toasted malts, melanoidin is the most prominent. Not a lot of recipes use this. About 1 in 5 for melanoidin. 18% at an average of 4.8% of the grist. Others used aromatic, biscuit, and honey malts. I will be on the low side here. I'm using this because we're seeing a trend upward in time of toasted malts being used in this style. Just to complement the, I'm not doing a good decoction, spoiler alert, just to give me some decoction flavors and to complement that toasty, bready Munich malt flavors, I'm adding melanoidin here. Roasted malts, big proportion used either chocolate or Carafao Special. 44% of the recipes, actually more than that, 55% used chocolate malt at around 1.75% of the grist. And this is skewed by, there was a recipe that used 6.5% chocolate malt and one over here as well. So these curves are more probably around 1% of the grist. I should have thrown out the high-low here. However, this is the curve with all the data. I'll be on the low end of this just to give me my color and following that trend we saw early on of lesser and lesser roast malts being used. Bittering hops, we had 14 different bittering hops. The over 50% were either middle fruit or magnum. I will be using magnum because that's really what today's recipes are using. Seeing an increase in the use of magnum over time. Flavor hops, we had 5 different flavor hops used, middle fruit being by far the most used, and I will be using middle fruit for mine. And on aroma, middle fruit, Tet, and German Tradition, and some others used as aroma hops. Only 5 different aroma hops used here. I will not be using an aroma hop. Looking at the rate of hop additions for flavor hops, it was anywhere very low, very, very low to 0.3 ounces per gallon for flavor. The average was 0.13 ounce per gallon. And for aroma hops, only 27% of the recipes used. This is right on the border of where I would use it or not. I decided not to use an aroma hop, even though it was used in about a third of the recipes. The average for aroma hops was 0.11 ounce per gallon. And the reason I'm not using aroma hops is it's used very early on. However, nowadays, with the exception of up here this one year, it's just not used. Lots of no recipes using aroma hop here. Good correlation down. Mash type, the majority were some sort of step mash, either a decoction or a single or a step. I'll be using a step mash here. There were 4 steps used in all the recipes. First was an acid rest. We only had about 10 to 12% of the recipes using acid rest. Average temperature was 113 or 45 Celsius for an average of 12 minutes. Protein rest was the next most prominent. Right around almost 50% of the recipes used protein rest. Anywhere between 121 and 135. 127 was the average. The average duration was 23 minutes. Beta rest, some of the recipes use a Hookers mash, 146 Fahrenheit or 63 Celsius average for an average of 45 minutes. And then the main saccharification rest, 153 Fahrenheit or 67 Celsius for about an hour. And it ranged between 148 and 158. That was the range there. I'll be doing a protein rest on the high end at 130 and a little bit high on the alpha rest as well at 154. Both of these rests, the protein temperature going up to 130 we see here, and a little bit increase, but a good correlation on the alpha amylase, or the main saccharification temperature increasing as well. The duration for the main saccharification rest, this was a long mash early on, but nowadays people are just doing a 60, or even these are step mashes with the beta rest as well. So I think it's a good correlation to stick to a 60-minute mash here for this style. You don't need any longer for this style. However, the boil is anywhere between 60 and 90 with a bias towards the 90 at 80-minute mean. And I do recommend a longer boil. I think you're going to need it to get the gravity, the in the fermenter gravity, starting gravity that you're going to need for this style. All right, fun times now. The yeast used, surprisingly, the Oktoberfest strain, the Weihenstephan 206, was the most prominent, followed by a tie for second with the Weihenstephan, I'm not going to say it, this White Labs 838 or 2308, and then the 3470 strain and the Eyinger strain. They all tied here. This is the Bock strain here. I will be using the Bock strain because looking at the data, this was only recently introduced as a strain, I believe, in the early part of the late 2000s, and really is coming to prominence with the winning styles here. 100% of the recipes recently, for some 50, and so really, the Bock strain just seems to be the one that's doing really well right now. Water chemistry, calcium anywhere between 40 and 150. A little bit of magnesium. Sodium was really huge here, up to 80 parts per million sodium. Sulfate between 30 and 155, and chlorides between around 60 and 150. I'll be on the low end of calcium, and then right on the numbers for most of the other ones. This gives you a more fuller profile for malty beers, having a chloride over sulfate ratio. Not very big. My recipe that's in this data set that I developed myself had a much bigger ratio of chloride over sulfate. Fermentation temperatures, the average was 51.5 degrees Fahrenheit or 10.8 Celsius. For the other strains, the Oktoberfest strain, huge range. Some people did the pressure ferment at high temperatures and did well with that. With the Oktoberfest strain, which had an average of around 54. Take those out, and this probably pulls back into this 50, lower 50s, upper 40s range here. For 838, the average was about 48, 49. And for the Bock strain, which is what I'm using, the average was 51, and that's where I'm going to ferment mine at. Carbonation volumes, average was 2.4, and the average mash pH was 5.38. Now, for the Meanbrews Recipe, again, I'm going to split the Munichs equally between Munich 1 and Munich 2. I find it really works well with this style. I've won many medals with this much Munich and splitting it between the two. So about 37% of each, and then about 19% of Pilsner. I'm using all Weyermann malts here because they're readily available. 3% Cara Munich 3%, 3% Melanoidin, and right at about 1%. Just do this to hit your color of Carafas Special 3. I find the Special 3 gives the least amount of roast character for the most amount of color. For hops, again, we're going to start with 22 IBUs of Magnum at 60 minutes, and then 0.13 ounce per gallon or 0.97 or 1 gram per liter of Middle Fruit at 15 minutes for flavor. And use the Eyinger strain. This is either Yeast 2487, White Labs 833, or Omega 111. They're all the same. This is the Bock strain. We're going to shoot for original gravity 1.073 and 27 IBUs. Our water chemistry, again, has that chloride over sulfate ratio a little bit higher. Mash pH of 5.38, so use your favorite. Use it acidulated malt if you want to follow the Reinheitsgebot, or do what I do and add phosphoric acid. Here I didn't need to add any. The dark malts got me there already. We're going to do step mash at 130 Fahrenheit or 54 Celsius for 25 minutes. And a saccharification rest at 154 Fahrenheit or 68 Celsius for an hour. And then we're going to boil the wort for 90 minutes after we sparge. Chill it to 50 or 10C, and we're going to do a big starter, a 3-liter starter for a 5-gallon batch. You really need to pitch this well. It's got to be a clean ferment, so make sure you pitch it very well. We're going to ferment at 51 Fahrenheit or 11 Celsius for 7 days. Raise it up for a diacetyl rest to about 60 Fahrenheit or 16 Celsius and hold for an additional 7 days. Rack to secondary or keg and slowly chill to lagering temperatures. Watch for oxygen uptake here. You want to either close your fermenter or your vessel that you're chilling, and you want to add CO2 as you're doing it, because you will suck in air into the fermenter or vessel as the liquid contracts and gives you more headspace. The average duration for lagering was 2 months, 60 days, and then serve it at 2.4 volumes of CO2. And that's it for this episode. Next is the Patreon-nominated style of Czech dark lager, and I've got a good recipe just sent in from a great brewer, Michael Rensing, who just scored a 49 out of 50 with his Czech dark lager. So I'm looking forward to covering this style. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks. Bye-bye.